Hello, everyone, and welcome to the breakout session at the 2020 Trustees and Friends Conference on strategic planning during the time of COVID-19. We have lots of folks in the room here with me, and thank you all for coming. I have a bit of a PowerPoint that I'd like to share with you to help us get the discussion going. But again, I invite you to be as interactive as you'd like, using the chat box or unmuting yourself and talking. I was really interested if you happened to attend the town hall with Jason before this session, especially at the end. He was talking about trustees helping directors and looking towards the future. A couple of the things that he said really struck a bell with me. I'm hoping it did with you too, especially the parts about trustees needing to be advocates, trustees really needing to be transparent with their community about the decisions that they're making for their library during this time. And all of that really and he also said that we need to figure out how the community views the library during these changing times. And all of that I see, honestly, as being wrapped up in this idea of strategic planning. And those of you who have gone to my trainings before know that I am a huge fan of how strategic planning and community engagement are very tightly interwoven. And when you're doing a strategic planning process and you're engaging the community in that in and of itself weaves advocacy in with it too. So all of these topics are really central to a lot of what I talk to people about. And one of the videos we'll be releasing later this week is actually going to have the slides I'm going to show you this morning. So this morning is a bit of a preview of the training video we'll be releasing later this week. And that talks about these things. And it's about a 20-minute training video. So I'm hoping that you'll engage with me in these topics because, you know, when I usually do this training, it's during the before COVID times, where you could actually bring people together fairly easily to a certain extent, depending on your community, and engage in conversation. And now we're really faced with this idea of how do we plan for the future when so much is up in the air? How do we gather people when so much is up in the air? How do we do that safely? So I'm hoping that you've been thinking about these things and are ready to jump forward with me and thinking about how do we engage in this community needs assessment, strategic planning, and advocacy. So this is the slides that will be released later this week as part of an official training on this. I'm going to sort of skip through a bunch of these with you and ask you to be thinking about the implications of this with COVID-19. So when the department talks about strategic planning and thinking strategically, there was a time years and years ago where we had certain processes that we planned, or certain strategic planning processes that we taught to folks to help you develop a plan that you could use. And we realized over time that because, as you know, all the libraries in Vermont are so different and all the communities are immensely different, that one strategic planning process is not really going to cut it going forward. And so when I talk about strategic planning, I focus on two things. One, engage in the community somehow in that planning process. And that's the crux that we have to think about now, is how do we do that in the time of COVID-19? And again, I encourage you to be thinking about this and offering up some of your ideas in the chat, or unmuting yourself and sharing some of those ideas. So one, engage the community in figuring out how the community views itself, how it views what the community needs as a whole, and how the library is interwoven in that. And then two, developing a plan that you're actually going to use with your director as a team moving forward. Because I think we've probably all heard about or been engaged in strategic planning initiatives in the past that have resulted in these wonderful documents that sit on a shelf and people never look at. And that I've been engaged in those processes before, and I find them intensely frustrating. And so me as a trainer, as working with trustees and friends, what's important for me is that you guys develop something that you actually think you will use and will be helpful to you as you continue this amazing resource that you are for your community and governing this amazing library resource. So I should have started by introducing who I am to all of you. I think most of you have seen me on the listservs or know me to some extent. I am the governance and management consultant at the department, and this sort of talking about strategic planning is a lot of what I do. But I answer a wide range of questions all over the map from library trustees and directors and friends groups as well. And that's my whole job, is working with you folks to make sure that your libraries are as strong and sustainable as possible moving forward for your community. And I think that's what we're all engaged in right now. How do we remain strong? How do we figure out a message that we can use with our community that works, especially as we're looking at budget season coming up. And we're going to be talking about budgets later on this week with Gary. Some of the questions that'll be happening on the listserv have to do with strategic planning and budgeting and that sort of thing. But I encourage you throughout the week to send me questions as well, to engage with me and each other on this really challenging topic. So how do you know if the library meets the needs of your patrons? When I talk about strategic planning, I talk about a couple different ways to do this. And one of them is this initial information gathering, which I think we can still do right now, because this information gathering isn't something we need to necessarily bring the community together for. This is more of us as a team of trustees and the director, and using your friends group too, to go out and figure out what community assessments have been done by others in our community. And then what can we learn from census data? And I feel like this is a great thing to be doing during a time when we don't necessarily want to be gathering with a lot of people, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to build off what other people have already learned about what our community needs, so that we can use that information to think about how the library slots into that and can work with that. And some of you may be thinking, why is Lara talking about what the community needs? We're really interested in strategic planning for the library itself. And for me, if you know me, my whole passion is about community engagement and letting the community tell us what's needed out there, and then us working creatively to figure out what of the things that people are telling us the community needs, what makes sense for us as a library to try to put as part of our vision and part of our strategic plan moving forward. Because if you ask people, what does the library need? What you'll tend to hear are things maybe that you already do, or they'll tell you what they think you want to hear, or they just won't know what to say. And if you ask them what they think the community needs, or if you ask your community, what sort of community do you want, or what sort of community would make you happy, you'll hear some ideas that may help spark some creativity in your thinking about your strategic plan for your community. And I think this sort of thinking has really led some libraries who have done this to try really innovative ideas that 20, 30, 40 years ago, we wouldn't have considered libraries doing, such as having food programs or partnering with the food distribution to get food to people. I think that's becoming more and more of a thing that libraries do now that maybe wouldn't have traditionally been thought of. And these are needs that people have discovered reaching out to the community and asking what they need. And so there may be some other local groups that have done some sort of community needs things, like maybe the town planners have, maybe the school has, some other town department, maybe some other nonprofit, civic, religious organization has done something like this. In most of Vermont's small communities, there has been some organization over the past few years who has done some sort of assessment. And hopefully there's someone on the board who is either connected to these groups, or, as is often the case in Vermont, knows someone who's connected. And you can use those strings of connection to ask people and request, hey, can I learn from what you've gathered in the past, and build off that. And in that way, just in that asking and in learning from what others have done, the library is doing some advocacy work and is making some connections, which I think is really important, as you know. And thinking about what is it that you've learned from them that you can build off from. But also, and again, these slides will be released later this week, although as a hint, I've already put them on our website under the link for today's session. So if you go to the main conference page, you can get a link to all these slides too. But I give you a hint here. The census data is a good place to look, and the American Community Survey data, which is done every 5 years, gets deeper into smaller town information. And so I encourage you to check that out. It has some really neat information about, how percentage of homeowners, renters, education levels, stuff like that. And then Michael Mosher is a really awesome guy who works at the UVM Center for Rural Studies. I like him a lot. He's a data nerd, kind of like I am, and he loves helping people look through census data and put it into context. So this could be part of your information gathering that you're doing now, or that you have people on the trustee board or volunteers do who may not wish to interact with the public at this time. This will be, they can be doing phone calling and emailing and that sort of thing. And I think this is a great thing anyone could be doing, but especially people who don't want to, who are not comfortable or who don't have, who need to self-isolate more, can be doing this sort of work and gathering this information to help the board with its strategic planning ideas moving forward. And then those of you who know me know I'm a big fan of turning outward and engaging with the community and listening and seeing what you can learn from community experts. And when I say expert, I mean both people we think of as experts, but also anyone who lives in your community is an expert of the community knowledge. What is it that they see as important for the community? What do they envision as being central to living in a meaningful, vibrant community? And you can learn from them too. And this is a picture of a handout I got from the Harwood Institute when I went and got trained with them a couple years ago. And their whole philosophy is looking at not only expert knowledge, but public and community-based knowledge to help direct where we go. And so as we're in the middle of this weird COVID-19 pandemic, trying to figure out where our libraries going to go, there's a lot of uncertainty. And yet there is likely a lot that we can learn from each other despite not knowing exactly what's going to happen this fall. We can still be thinking about critically and carefully with our community members about what is it that the library can continue to do. But at the same time, thinking about how can we communicate with the community about what we're already doing and reframe what it is we're already doing so that the community can better understand how those activities are also helping to build community and helping to serve the community. One of the things, as I've turned outward and been engaging with library directors, and I encourage you to think about as you turn outward and engage with your community, is sort of reframing the conversation, if you've not done so already, to no matter the status of your building, the library itself, the people are still open, we're still serving, and really emphasizing that as you talk to folks, because I think one of the challenges we'll face as we move towards budget season is defending why the library should continue to be funded if the building is closed or only partially open. And so thinking about that strategically as part of your strategic thinking and your planning moving forward, how to frame that, how to message that you guys are still working, you're still interacting, you're still serving community needs will be part of your challenge as you think about the strategic planning, part of the implications that you're facing. But you can also figure out how to do that wording by, again, turning outward and engaging with the community to listen to what they need and what you hear, the language that they use, you can use as you start talking again in budget season about what you're actually doing. It's sort of one of the advocacy things I learned from Turning the Page, which is one of the advocacy resources at the end of this slideshow, which I'll be talking about later this week also, is using the words of the people that you're talking to when you're talking to them to help them better understand what you're saying. So as you're engaging with the community, listening to the words that they're using and trying to reflect those back to them. The example I use is when you're talking to the select board, talk about the taxpayers that come to the library as opposed to patrons, because taxpayers is the select board's word, whereas patrons is our word. Just a little hint. So I'm going to stop talking soon. And again, I invite you to enter into the chat any questions or thoughts that you have based on what you're hearing me say, or use the raise your hand feature if you'd like, or just sort of unmute yourself and shout out your question. That any of those are fine as we go through this, because I really, I could sit here and talk forever, but I would like to hear your thoughts and questions as we go through. So this slide really shows you this, again, this web of connections that exist in our community. And I encourage the board, as you think about the strategic planning implications of COVID-19 and your services moving forward, I encourage you to think about all of these different groups in your community. Barbara has used the raise your hand feature. So thank you for doing that, Barbara. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
I can't see your slides.
Oh, interesting. Can April, can you see my slides?
Yeah, I can.
Interesting. I'm curious, can other people see my slides or are they blank for everyone?
I can see them.
Other people
Okay.
can. Okay.
I can see
Yeah,
them
we can
also.
see your
And a bunch
slides.
of people are saying they can in chat.
Okay. So
Okay, it's
Yeah.
on my end.
yeah, no, Barbara, I think one of the things you can try is well, if you want to bip out, you can also sort of on another screen, you can, if you want to just see all of the slides on the website, I posted all of these. And so you can actually see them all.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, you won't actually be able to see them as I advance them, but you'll be able to see them.
Okay.
Excellent. And this is a reminder, folks, if your camera is on, just go ahead and hover over the center of the screen and click on the camera to turn your camera off so that you won't be captured in the recording. Yeah, and someone else said that some of the slides are blurry. Yeah, it's interesting how the internet connection can make some of these things work and some of them can't. But anyway, thank you for pointing that out. And yeah, and those of you who are online can probably, I don't know if we can mute whoever's making the echo. There we go. Those of you who are online can probably see when Barbara raised her hand, that little yellow raise your hand thing came up. So feel free to go ahead and use that if you'd like to ask a question, or like I said, just unmute yourself and just come right in, that's fine. So hopefully most of you can see this web of different things on the screen, my slide here. I encourage the trustee board to look through this and systematically work out all of these different things that exist in your community, all the different organizations where people tend to meet up or tend to run into each other, even during COVID-19, and then think about how you might engage some of these folks. And whether you may have board members who are connected to each one of these organizations, and that's great. That makes an easy connection. You can pull on that string. Or, like I said earlier, do you know anyone who's connected to these groups so that you can really engage them in a conversation about what is it that your community needs right now? If you can get people to engage in thinking about what they wish the community was like in the future, I understand that that's really challenging right now. We are very much wired as a species to put out the fire in front of us. And for many of us right now, that is COVID-19 and figuring out how to survive or figuring out how to get our kids online for school, all of that. But at the same time, we have to figure out how to be thinking about how much our library is going to reopen, what services we're going to offer. And when trustees and directors reach out to me and say, what should we be doing? As Jason said, the morning session, we can't tell you what to do, but we can give you questions to ask. We can tell you what the governor and the Agency of Commerce and Community Development has mandated for certain things. But in terms of what's right for your community, in terms of services, that's really going to be something that you and your director and your friends groups are all going to have to turn outward and think about. What is it that the community is asking for? Because if there's a mismatch between what the community asks for and the services you're offering during this time, you'll need to be, as Jason said, very transparent about how did you come to that decision to offer these services and why. And if you've not engaged the community at all in your decision making, there might be some tension and some mismatch, especially as you're thinking about budget season. So as much as you can, figuring out what avenues exist in your community for connecting with your community members, I think is really important moving forward. And that could be getting invited to the Zoom meetings for these different groups that you've analyzed in your community. It could be some communities are still having fall events that are happening, and they're being very careful about socially distancing and setting up stations where people can walk around and see vendors. If there's a way that you can be involved in that as a library, that might be a great way to engage with the community and ask them a few questions as you start thinking about what you're going to offer for services and your next strategic planning process, all of that stuff. So be thinking about that with your board and asking questions around all of that. And then this slide really shows you how I used to talk to people about doing community engagement ideas. And again, we have to think about this a little bit with a grain of salt with COVID-19, because there may be a way to do focus groups in socially distanced, very careful way, either online or in a large space. And that may actually be a great way for continuing to engage in conversation and to dive deep. A lot of people like to use surveys because they feel like that's a safer way, an easier way. But whenever I talk to people about surveys, I really talk about what is it that you hope to accomplish with a survey and how deep do you wish to go? Because surveys are good for certain types of things, but they're not necessarily going to get you any deep answers on anything. So if you guys are thinking about doing a survey, I encourage you to reach out and engage with me, and I can help you think through what types of information you might be able to gather with a survey and how to do that effectively as you think about future services or your strategic planning process.
And there's
then
a couple hands in the chat.
Yes, excellent, excellent. Julie, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
So just going back, I'm at Barnet Public Library.
Nice.
Just so you know where we're at, Northeast Kingdom.
Yep.
We are providing lots of awesome creative services, but our building's not open. And I feel like this weather, September, has given us this weird lull. And that's where I'm stuck, because I can tell that my community is wanting to be in the building more, but I kind of feel like I have to hold the reins back. There is no conflict between me and the director. But I just wanted to hear if anybody else, like, that's what I'm stuck with. Like, there's part of me that says, oh, we need to be in our building. And I'm getting that sense from my community. And so from a strategic planning point of view, I also can't predict what the virus is going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great question. Thank you for bringing that up. I can let you know what I'm hearing from other libraries and from the government. The other libraries are starting to bring up is, well, first of all, how do we follow all the ACCD mandatory guidelines around how many people can be in the building, the cleaning, all of that? So you really have to have a conversation with your board and your director. If, how many people can we have in the building following those guidelines? How many people does it feel safe? And do we have the cleaning supplies that we need and the protective equipment we need? Transmission is what is the most challenging. And so some libraries are now facing the next question, which is, when we have nice days out, we can open up the windows and we have great air circulation in our library and we can have people come in, and we just got to keep a count, keep the number down. And that's actually really working for some communities. But once it gets cold, how are we going to do that? And that's one of the things that we're talking about the department, trying to figure out some guidelines around all of that in terms of HVAC systems and air exchange. And we have a few links that we've started gathering that we'll put on our website soon that hopefully will be helpful. But I think that will be one of the challenges, is figuring out, how do we purify the air? How do we allow for air circulation? And the real challenge, I think, especially for folks in the smaller libraries and in the Northeast Kingdom, is finding an HVAC professional or someone who has certification in HVAC systems that can come in and assess your building with you and your system with you to talk about the level of air exchange in your building. So to make sure that you've got an adequate amount of air exchange that you can let people in and you're not endangering your employees. So I think that is the balance, on nice warm days when you can open up the windows, you're following all the safety guidelines. And if your staff feel comfortable and you've got protection for them, if as a team you come up with, yes, we can let a certain number of people in, we're feeling safe with that, I think that's great. And then you can figure out how to work that in and advertise that with your community. But exactly how you implement that is going to be so different by library, because every library is designed differently, different type levels of staff, different expectations from the community. So it's that communication and planning, I think, is the key part. Anyone have any other thoughts on that, or do you have a follow-up to that, Julie?
No, I don't have a follow-up. I think it's your point is well taken in how individual it has to be. I mean, we're also getting an HVAC person to come in. I don't even know if we have anybody in the Northeast Kingdom, but it's also funding that. how do you get the money to do that? Because we didn't budget for it and we're operating on last year's. I mean, the challenges kind of are a little bit like that. One challenge leads to the next challenge, leads to the next challenge.
Absolutely. Such a good point. And that's also another thing that we're talking about at the department is where is the money going to come from this? And there are a few CARES Act funding things still out there that, again, we'll put on our website. But that is going to be a big challenge for all of us. Absolutely. And so I encourage the trustees and the friends to have some thoughtful discussion around how are you going to afford those sort of things, and do you do a fundraising effort around that specifically? Will there be some folks in your community who are into environmental improvements for the library who might be willing to fund something like that? Or is that something you put into your budget request for the fall? And so thinking about that now, I think, is essential, and figuring out, do you have to shuffle things around? And again, it's going to be really dependent on your funding sources, your budget. If you have any potential funding sources in town that might be able to help. And again, we'll put a funding source on our website. I can't remember what it was we were brainstorming on Friday as a group, because this is definitely something that's at the forefront of our brains at the department, is trying to figure out what resources might be out there to help you guys. Great question. Thank you very much. Jan, you had your hand up. Go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like.
Hi, Lara. Can you hear okay?
I can. Thank you.
So this is somewhat related to Julie's question. In our community, and I'm a library director in Castleton, one of the troubles I have with looking at this graphic of all the different groups is in our community, it seems that there's a ton of diversity in terms of how people think about things in our community. So it's not like necessarily racial diversity, but other kind of diversity. We have a lot of subgroups. And I often feel like a ping pong ball, because I'll hear something from one small subset, and I know that it's not very representative of a larger subset. And I really struggle with this, especially during COVID, because in our town, our school district opted for full-time back in school face-to-face. So they're not doing a hybrid model at all. And because of that, there's been some, I think, further pressure to open up more quickly than some people might have wanted to do. And so, I think the people that are more conservative in terms of sheltering during COVID, I just wonder how to reach those opinions in the planning, and how to, how to try to respect all of these little subgroups. If you have any kind of advice about that. Thanks.
Such a great question. Thanks, Jan. And I feel like the diversity of opinion and viewpoints on this seems to be highlighted because there's so much emotion and tension around this, in a way that I think is always there to a certain extent with different issues. It's just that with the heightened fear and uncertainty around this, I feel like those natural tensions that exist in our community on a wide range of issues are really being highlighted and exacerbated. And I encourage everyone, honestly, this is sort of a plug. We've made live our keynote speakers video this morning. And you'll find the link to that on the main conference page. Susan Clark is our keynote speaker, and she's talking about this issue. How do we engage with a wide range of viewpoints in our community in what she calls slow democracy, in bringing people together to come to a consensus or come to a discussion around all these different viewpoints to reach a decision on how to move forward. And Susan is a powerful speaker. Again, I highly encourage you to watch the video that we released. It's a little long because she talks about a lot of things, and she and I have a Q&A at the end. And I also encourage you, as part of that, to submit questions to me to send to her for her to work through, and she'll write written responses, which I'll share with you later in the week. But a lot of what she talks about is creating a space where people can feel heard and be heard. And so it's thinking with your trustee board and with your friends group and with your staff, how, as you think about all these different groups and how people may be connected to them, or if you think about the different groups that exist in your town whose voices aren't being heard, what makes sense in your town for reaching out to these folks to make sure that they're heard and make sure that their voice is part of the conversation as well. Is it someone making a phone call? Is it someone making a phone call to encourage that person to speak up and then call the director or call a trustee? What makes sense? And it may be very personality driven. It may be specific to the person. But I think in all of these cases, as you think about strategic planning, community engagement, services to offer all of this, is the truth that any one method is not going to work. Any one method is going to exclude voices. So you have to have a diversity of methods to try to reach as many people as possible, including people who aren't going to necessarily self-select and reach back when you reach out. So how do you reach out in a way that encourages people who aren't necessarily talkers to feel empowered to offer their opinion as well? Because sometimes I think, the people who aren't usually listened to or don't normally have a voice in community engagement conversations, they have to be approached with compassion and care to get them to be even willing to talk if they're used to not being listened to. So this is sort of a lot of ways around trying to answer Jan's question, but I think it applies to strategic planning in general, in addition to what services you offer now. It's really being strategic and thinking, how do people listen? How do people communicate? And how do we communicate in a way that shows people we're listening, if that makes sense? And there will be disagreement. I don't think you'll ever come to a complete consensus. So it's like, okay, what are the range of things that we can offer so that everybody gets a little bit of something, and so that people feel safe and people get a service that matches their needs in a way that we can offer it. And if that means that certain people are offering certain services at certain times of the day in certain ways, you have to figure out, given the limits of your library in terms of staffing and funding and your board, what makes the most sense. And after you've talked through that exhaustively, then you have to figure out how you're going to communicate your decisions to your community in a way that's transparent and open and honest. Hopefully that helps at least a little bit, Jan. Deborah, I see that your hand is up. Do you want to pose a question or comment?
Sure. Along those lines, and the whole conversation around looking outward.
Oh, we may have lost you, Deborah. You still there?
And I think I'm here. Can you not hear me?
Yep, now we can. Yep.
Okay. I'll start again then. Along the lines of reaching out or looking outward and reaching outward. And this, certainly harder in the time of COVID because it's easier to get people together in a room as a focus group than it is, I think, on Zoom or telephone or something like that. Do you, and you're talking about differences of opinion. So would you recommend that, look at this chart that has civic groups, parent groups, et cetera, that instead of pulling together people from each group, that you meet with the individual groups? So in other words, if you met with the religious groups alone, and then the civic groups, rather than bring in, a person from the religious, to have more of a diverse viewpoint in a focus group. I don't know if I'm making myself clear here.
I think it makes sense. Yeah. And whatever method you use to engage people, I think is going to be dependent on your community and your knowledge of your community and your knowledge, what you can find out about the people. So I've heard conversations being successful both ways in terms of bringing in a bunch of different folks representing religious organizations and having one conversation with just the folks representing that. And then I've heard success with people having a conversation with a diverse range of representation from very many different areas, and that being successful. In these situations, when you have conversations with folks or just having them one-on-one, which can be very time intensive, but can also allow you to delve really deep with certain people. So I think it really depends on your knowledge of folks, being sensitive to, as you extend invitations, how people are responding, and experimenting a little bit and being honest about that you're trying something new, and being humble and open about that, I think can help. One of the things that I've discovered in the work that I'm doing is the more open and honest I can be with people about how we're trying something and we're trying to be very intentional about what we're doing. And this is the prep work we've done, but we're not really sure how it's going to go. And we ask people to be patient with us and with each other as we figure this out together. That sort of invitation to work with us and to do it with us, I think oftentimes opens people up to being a little bit more patient and open to the process, if that makes sense. So yeah, I hate to be sort of wishy-washy with my answer, but it's so, one of the things that I've discovered in this job is the more assumptions I make about what will work for a community, the more wrong I am. Because you guys know your community so much better than I do. You know, it doesn't matter how much I've traveled the state and how much I've learned. You guys are really the experts. It's sort of like taking that turning outward thing where we've got expert knowledge of the state versus community knowledge with all of you and replicating that in your community. The trustees and the directors have sort of the expert knowledge of the library, but the community has the expert knowledge of the community, or the community knowledge, if that makes sense. So yeah, there are a couple.
Lara?
Yeah,
there's a couple. I think you were going to say there's a couple comments in the chat, and I was just going to let you know about those.
Thank you. So it looks like Paula from the Bixby is talking about contacting Efficiency Vermont about the HVAC question. And it looks like she says they referred them to a list of 192 contractors who serve their zip code. So hopefully, thanks for that tip, Paula, for Efficiency Vermont. Glenn says the strategic question here would seem to be how we learn from the COVID-19 conditions that restrict operations to plan for the future. Absolutely. COVID-19 is unlikely to be a last such situation that may require future shutdowns. So how do we learn from this and build into plans for operations and capital needs to be implemented in the future? Absolutely. Thank you, Glenn, for posing that question. I think that is really central. And thinking about, what are you learning now? The process that you went through for shutting down and then forming your reopening plan, this sort of disaster planning that people have had a crash course in over the past 6 months, this is the sort of planning that we've been encouraging libraries to do for natural disasters and for other things for years. And so now the world has sort of made us all semi-experts to a certain extent in disaster planning for this particular circumstance, and taking a step back and as Glenn said, thinking about what is it that we've learned from this, and what is it that we will continue to learn moving forward, and how can we develop a plan just like you developed a plan with reopening that had to be flexible and still has to be flexible moving forward because things will continue to change. Think about that in terms of your strategic planning also. How can you develop a strategic plan that can be flexible, that's based on real values, real solid values, just like your reopening plan of being accessible and providing information and yet being safe? How can you situate and really make solid the values that you want your plan to represent moving forward, and then create some sort of flexibility to allow that to continue to change when other things come up, because we don't know what the next year exactly is going to be like, but I think we can plan around uncertainty and plan around those values. It is 11:42. We were slated to go until 11:45. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you all so much for joining me for this. I hope that you will continue to reach out and ask me questions. I hope you will continue to participate in all the discussions that are happening this week. We will be recording almost everything, so you'll be able to watch it at your own convenience if you're not able to join us in the moment. I will be releasing training videos, a couple training videos each day for the rest of the week that you can feel free to watch. Like I said earlier, this is the first time I've done these videos, so I invite you to have patience with me. They're not perfect recordings by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, the first one that I'll release tomorrow, I speak so quickly that those of you who like to listen to things on 2x speed will be probably pretty happy with it. So thank you for your patience with me on that. Feel free to reach out to me and invite me to come to your meetings, to have conversations, to help lead discussion. And yeah, I'm really excited that you're here. I'm really excited that we have such a large group of people participating this week. And thank you all for participating. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. And I hope you get to enjoy the sunshine and the warmer weather later this week. And I'm going to stop recording now, but folks can continue to chat for a couple more minutes if you'd like.